On this episode,
we're talking about the Zodiac Killer.
The story of the Seawater family and their connection with Arthur Lee Allen, and how all of those pieces of the puzzle fit together to point him as the Zodiac Killer.
The primary murders, there's a lot of murders that happen around this period, and a lot of them are attributed to the Zodiac Killer.
They're kind of holding him in very high regard, and you know, what this man meant to them as a teacher, as almost kind of a father figure.
The other three murders all happened within the same area of Knapp County, Vallejo, California. The problem with that is in Zodiac lore, he gives his name in one of the letters.
How do you feel about the fact that in the documentary, his 4th grade class says he used to teach us how to create ciphers? Every Friday, he would give us a cipher and have us decode that.
Imagine a darkened street in the heart of California, the moon casting eerie shadows as the clock strikes midnight. The air is thick with a sense of foreboding, whispering secrets of a figure who left a trail of cryptic messages and unsolved murders in his wake. Known only as the Zodiac Killer, this enigma has haunted the minds of detectives and armchair sleuths for decades. But what if I told you that the truth behind the Zodiac isn't just about a man, but perhaps a myth? What if the killer is merely a ghost of an urban legend, a creation of our collective fears? As we delve into this conspiracy, we'll unravel the threads connecting infamous names like Arthur Lee Allen and peel back the layers of the theory that the Zodiac Killer may have never existed at all. So pour yourself a drink, settle in, and prepare to question everything you thought you knew. Welcome to Cocktails and Conspiracies. My name is Shane Squark, here as always with the esteemed Mr. Phillips.
Yo!
Here
What's up, buddy?
it is, baby. Fresh off the tails. Well, first off, cheers. Welcome back to another episode of Cocktails and Conspiracies. What do we got in the glass today?
We're running a little bit of bourbon. I'm trying to remember what bourbon it was, but I honestly couldn't tell you what bourbon it is right now. But it's bourbon.
Clearly, it's your favorite bourbon. If it's a no-name one.
No, if it was my favorite bourbon, it would be Basil Hayden. If you guys want to sponsor us, or maybe just send me some bottles, I'll drink it every episode.
We'll put it right up
Basil
the screen.
Hayden.
I'm not a big bourbon guy, but I'll put it in here. I'm doing a little Bombay and club soda tonight with a little hit of lime in there. So
I like it.
Always a nice little gin drink there. It's been kind of my forte these last couple episodes here. It's a good winter drink. Yeah. I'm a big Bombay guy. You as well.
Love my GNCs.
Cocktail for you guys. I can't do the teas as much. I don't really love the tonic. No? In spurts I do. In the summer I don't mind it, but I gotta be in the mood for the tonic. I'd rather do like a ginger or a club or something else.
Yeah. I do the diet tonic. And it's just not as
syrupy.
It sounds stupid saying it's not as flavorful, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it is. Like, it's just like the tonic is overpowering. To me, like, I'm so used to diet tonic, right? Because when I eat well, when I eat healthy, and I'm eating like a ketogenic diet, I want to keep all that shit out of it. So I go with the diet one, which is, I'm sure, filled with lots of shit that are not good for you anyway. Plus, we're talking about drinking an alcoholic drink. Point being, I'm so used to it that I really don't like the regular tonic anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think as our palates have refined, perhaps with age, perhaps with just a lot of consumption of booze, particularly doing better booze, I just don't like anything that sort of dilutes the flavor of the booze. Like, you know, Bombay's a great gin. I love it. Delicious. But some of the other gins I'll drink, like Brooklyn Gin, small batch one, you're familiar with it. Our listeners might not be. Super delicious, and it's got a very good, rich flavor. So you dilute it with tonic, and I just feel like it tastes like tonic. Doesn't taste like gin. And just drink cheap shit gin at that point. You know, why buy the good stuff for? And that's the same thing like hard liquors too, like vodkas and stuff. I'll just do some of the club soda in there, so you can really enjoy the flavor and maybe put some fresh fruit in there.
Look, if I do a G&T, like I will use what's that shit one that I brought to your house that I drink all the time? Stratosphere. Was that it? No, not Stratosphere. What is it?
It's actually not that bad.
I don't think it's that bad. It's cheap as hell.
It's good, like what I'd call like a house gin.
Right, exactly. Like it's a perfect house gin. New Amsterdam, that's it.
Yep.
I think they have like a New Amsterdam Stratosphere. I think that's where I got that name from. Sorry, New Amsterdam. Yeah. I personally like it. I don't mean to call your gin shit. I actually personally think it's really good. I'm not a big gin aficionado. I'm more of a bourbon guy. And even still, I'm not a bourbon aficionado. But I know my bourbons a lot more than I know my gins. I drink a lot more of it, so you know.
Don't take Tim's condescending words as any sort of message that we're saying that we don't want that sponsorship. We still want that sponsorship, so we'll take that.
100%.
God damn it. Listen, if Poland Spring Vodka wants to give us a sponsorship, we're willing to take that. Get a little bit of money coming into here. I can't promise I'll drink that one on air, but we'll certainly put your bottle somewhere within the frame. Might not. Let's do it at the end of the podcast here. Tonight we're talking about something that's hot topic in pop culture today, but
the election
story.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. What? Well, the day
I'm fried though, dude. I'm fried from the election, bro.
So today is the night after the election on the day we're recording it, so it's November 6th. So by the time you all see this, it'll be a couple weeks from there. So big congratulations to GJT, Donald Trump. It was a wild night for those that are on the conservative side, or I guess mostly independent. For those that are not, sorry. But we're talking about the Zodiac Killer, which has sort of resurfaced in a Netflix docuseries called This is the Zodiac Speaking, right?
This is the Zodiac Speaking, which was, I think you pointed this out, there was a 2007 documentary by the same name, right?
Yeah.
Or if it was a film or...
It was a documentary film, yeah. I mean, the Netflix is more of a docu-series, I guess they call them, versus the documentary is traditionally a full-length film. And so that was probably one of the most... The 2007 film was probably one of the most lauded or applauded, most well-respected documentaries on the Zodiac Killer. It talked to a lot of the people that were actually involved, some of the victims, some of the people really close to the victims. And so, when they come out this new one with the same name, it confused the crap out of me. I thought for sure I had seen it when Tim was telling me about it. But it is completely different. This one focuses a lot more on Arthur Lee Allen, who is sort of taken the throne as like the de facto accepted belief in most Zodiac culture outside of community.
I wanted to tell you that you fucked up when you were doing the intro and you called him the Zodiac, and I was like, dude, his name is Arthur Lee Allen. Like, come on.
What?
I'm joking.
What are you talking
about? Because you call him the Zodiac, and I'm like, bro, it's Arthur Lee Allen.
I said infamous names like Arthur Lee Allen.
I know. I'm breaking your balls because I subscribe to the Arthur Lee Allen theory.
Well, so that's really where this came. Most people don't know this, and Tim just found this out. As I am a die-hard Zodiac aficionado. Maybe not so much anymore, but I got really turned on to the Zodiac Killer many years ago. Not really even for like the theme of the story, but when I heard Zodiac Killer, I immediately think like I was really into like astronomy growing up as a kid. I loved the stars, I loved the moon. Yeah. I was into the constellation stuff, not like astrology crap. Like I just thought all that stuff was really fascinating. And so when I hear Zodiac Killer, my mind immediately goes to like, what is he like? Is he planning his murders in relation to constellations or like star patterns, something like that? That's what I thought it was, and it got me hooked into it. Of course, that has nothing to do with what's actually going on. It's a name he pretty much dubbed himself, and we can kind of get into why we think a little bit later. But going into it, when I got turned on to the whole thing, this is probably just around the time that 2007 movie came out. I think it was just called Zodiac. Maybe was that 2007?
Oh,
yeah, it was a 2007 film. I think it was just before that I had first heard about it and then checked out the film. It was just captivating to me because there's not too many serial killers that were unsolved. And it felt in the dawn of the internet era, or I guess that was kind of the height of it. What?
Hey, there you are.
Yeah. No, I've been here the whole time. You keep doing this to me, and you keep like forcing me to try to like make the edits, but we're not doing them. You're not losing me. I'm here.
You were frozen on my screen for like 30, whatever you just said for the past 30 seconds. I have no idea.
Well, don't worry, because mine is working perfectly fine. It's yours because you're not on a hardline connection.
Correct.
See, he does this intentionally, ladies and gentlemen. The moral of the
I
story
want you to have to edit it.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. The moral of the story is I got really hooked into this thing, and the fact that, in this birth of the heights of the internet era, you were able to see a lot of the documentation that all these other people had picked up, put it on their like cheesy websites, and you can now, kind of surmise who you think is the Zodiac Killer. So that's really what got me drawn in. It was like really the first detective thing. What's that?
Mm-hmm. Done. You're good.
Oh, you're just, the way you're talking is just very off right now. You're definitely choppy over there too. So it was like really the first like detective aspect on the internet, which I thought was pretty interesting, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Is this your first exposure?
I was going to say, so while I do enjoy, obviously, conspiracy, and I do find serial killers very interesting, Zodiac was one that I never really got into, and I don't have a good reason as to why. I think, I love history, and I love the 1700s, I love the 1800s, I love the Victorian era, so for me, I gravitate to Jack the Ripper, my goodness, what's his name, Henry Mudgett. I kind of gravitate towards that era a little bit more, because it kind of combines the fucked up life of, a serial killer with, those Victorian eras, and I find that really fascinating, so I kind of really gravitated more so towards that, but I never really got into Zodiac for no good reason, so yes, this was my first real exposure. Of course, I know the story, I watched a little bit of it here and there, but I did watch that docu-series the other night, which is when I hit you up, and I was like, dude, I'm like, did we talk about him during MK Ultra? Some red flags got raised a little bit there, and so here we are. Now we're talking about it.
And partially the reason we didn't talk about Arthur Lee Allen specifically in MK Ultra is because it's certainly not proven that he's the Zodiac Killer. This documentary obviously hasn't come out at this point, which is effectively alluding to that, and most things have alluded to that as well. But I also don't subscribe to the fact that it was Arthur Lee Allen. I did initially. That was sort of one of my first go-tos, but I've backed off that quite a bit. I think part of the reason why you probably weren't as interested is because every couple of years there's always like another documentary that comes out with somebody that thinks they solved the ciphers and know who it is.
Yeah.
And there's been so many names. Like, it just it becomes like a punchline to a degree. Even when Trump called Ted Cruz the Zodiac Killer, and then people started going ape shit about that, like kind of jokingly, because I guess his facial structure.
What it is too? I kind of like. Sorry, dude. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Like I always look at and listen. I'm gonna shit on California here for a second, and I really don't mean to. I'm sure there's a lot of awesome people in California. I've never been there. Maybe it's a cool state. I don't know. Kind of seems like China to me. Like I just kind of look at like the era, right? Like the 60s, 70s, and I look at California, and I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm wearing a New York hat right now. Maybe I'm a little bit just kind of. I always kind of felt like, oh, fuck you, Cali. You're not as good as New York. Like, we're so much better than you. And I know that's so stupid. Like, I'm saying some of the stupidest things anybody's ever said right now. Like, light me up in the comments. It's totally fine. But I kind of feel that way a little bit. I was just not interested. Like, oh, it was LA. It was California. Fuck you. Whatever.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. I don't know.
I mean,
just me.
You're not the only person to feel that. Like, there's always been an LA-New York rivalry, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's hip-hop, Tupac and Biggie.
Sports.
Is there a bigger rivalry than that? Right, like the Yankees and the Dodgers. Obviously, there's bigger rivalries there, but there's always been some history between the two coasts. So perhaps that's bred into your mind, but I've kind of felt similar. Like, it's just the other side of the country. Don't really care what happens there. They also seem to be a hotbed for like serial killers. Honestly, like how many people came out of there or had some sort of planting there at some point, or some sort of stay there at some point. There's always some weird shit going on in Cali that you don't generally get as concentrated in other parts of the world, or at least you don't hear about it. So I liked what we did. I don't even remember which episode now, but we did it a couple episodes ago where we sort of set the stage. I think it was our propaganda episode, just to kind of set the stage on some terms, on some ideas, and some dates, I guess, just because I think a lot of our conversation about this documentary is going to have to reference a lot of these pieces. So in this podcast, there's a long way we can go with Zodiac. Anybody that's researched this before knows that this could be 10 hours worth of conversation. Some of the primary suspects that have largely been accepted by the Zodiac community are Richard Gaikowski, Arthur Lee Allen, of course, Rick Marshall, Lawrence Kane. There's dozens of others all over the place, and there's some evidence for and against a lot of those. For the sake of the discussion today, we are going to focus on Arthur Lee Allen solely, or more primarily, because he's one of the biggest names out there, and because this new documentary, which most people are interested in right now, focuses around his participation or his alleged involvement as the Zodiac Killer.
If you watch that, if you're unfamiliar with the Zodiac story, which we just talked about, I was, and you watch that if you watch that docuseries, you walk away going, well, clearly it was Arthur Lee Allen. You know what I mean? Like, it was, again, you have a different perspective, you've studied this for a long time, I have not, so not being familiar with any other suspects, I'm like, well, clearly it's him. I mean, there's just no other two ways around it. So I'm very interested to hear what you have to say tonight.
Well, so I want to actually flip that around. I was going to ask you the same thing. You're fresh into this, and I could be distorted by just diving down the rabbit hole too deep. I'm totally aware of that. I did end up watching that documentary, and there's some things that I thought were missing and some things that I thought they gave a little liberty to. But I want to hear your perspective on, like, when you watch the documentary, number one, summarize it. I don't think it's a spoiler here, ladies and gentlemen. Like, if you don't know about he's not gonna give specifics, but if you don't know who the Zodiac Killer is at this point, I mean, don't listen here, I guess. But summarize it for you, and then talk about, like, what the most compelling pieces of evidence were for you, why you think that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac Killer.
So what I find very interesting about this docuseries, right, is that it starts off, you're introduced to a family called the Seawater family, and I think there was like 6 or 7 kids. You don't meet all of them in the docuseries, but you meet about 3 or 4 of them, and they're kind of telling their story about their connection to Arthur Lee Allen. And they give you some background on, I like to abbreviate him as ALA. I'm going to go with ALA tonight. So when I say that, that's Arthur Lee Allen. So they give you some background on Mr. ALA. And,
I mean, he goes by the name Leigh. You can literally call him Leigh. And
I know, but I like ALA.
Say. Okay.
I'm going with ALA. I've made up my mind.
Let's do it.
I'm going with ALA. So ALA becomes involved with his Seawater family. They don't have a father. He's a 4th grade teacher. And it starts off they're kind of holding him in very high regard and what this man meant to them as a teacher, as almost kind of a father figure. And the story transpires from there, and it eventually gives you, through them telling their own stories, how their childhood with him lines up with the murders of the Zodiac Killer, right? And it's a 3-part docuseries. Granted, I watched this before, 48 hours of nonstop electric coverage, so I'm not as fresh as I would have been if we did this 2 days ago. But they do allude to a lot of different pieces of evidence in there. But it's largely in part the story of the Seawater family and their connection with Arthur Lee Allen and how all of those pieces of the puzzle fit together to point him as the Zodiac Killer. For me, there's 2 things that really stand out. And I'm gonna preface this with, just like we kind of do often on here, right? You have to believe the Seawater family and you have to believe their story. Right. Because if you don't, then all of it's bullshit, right? And if we find out 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years from now that it was bullshit, well, then it is what it is. Right now, that's what I know, and I'm going to take their word for it. But at the end of the documentary, the Seawater family connects the dots when they were children. They used to travel with him often, right? So he would kind of come and pick them up on the weekends and kind of take them to different outings, right? They would go to a race, right? Like a race car race. I don't remember which one. They might go to the beach. They would go do different activities. And it just so happened that when they would do these things, a Zodiac murder would occur, right? It would occur. They happen to be at this specific beach over here, and guess what? A Zodiac murder happens at that beach. They happen to be at a race in the early 60s, which is very close to a college campus, and guess what? A Zodiac murder happens there, right? So at the end, they piece together the map, if you will, and all the puzzles fall into place of, holy shit, we were there. We were there at every single one of these murders. We were there. We had no idea because we were children, but we were there. So that's number one. And you really have to watch the whole docuseries because that kind of comes all together at the end. I'm really not spoiling much for you because there's a lot of detail there that you're going to enjoy, but that's a big piece for me. And then also, if you look at the mother of the Seawater family, okay, the matriarch of the family. She had a very close relationship with ALA. And she tells one of her children that, who at some point confronts her and says, hey, I spoke to, they called him Mr. Allen, spoke to Mr. Allen, that this is what he told me, essentially confessing to being the Zodiac Killer. And the mother laughs it off, and no, it can't be. At some point, she alludes to, hey, I have a box full of just stuff. She doesn't really tell you what it is. I have this box. I don't want anybody going into it while I'm alive, but once I'm gone, you could look at it. Everything's going to make sense. Well, once they finally do that, and they go through this box, I mean, there were binders full of letters of correspondence between the mother and ALA. And in some of those letters, he, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty much straight up confessing to being the Zodiac Killer. Maybe the documentary, maybe whoever made the documentary took some liberties there. But based upon what I heard and what I read in those letters watching that docuseries, I don't see how anybody could say that somebody else is possibly the killer. I mean, he basically says, I'm the Zodiac Killer. And that's it.
Okay.
That's the big one.
Well, I said to Tim before this that I wanted to make sure we're on recording when I made this statement. I'm gonna repeat it for you all right now. By the end of this podcast, I'm going to convince you that Arthur Lee Allen was not the Zodiac Killer. I'm not going to cast doubt that he didn't have any involvement in any murder or anything nefarious. I think it's plausible. But I do not think he was responsible for all the murders that happened there. Speaking of the documentary, and I'm only going to broach on it a little bit, because again, the fine details are hard to tackle through. I think there is a big stretch on some of the events that the Stillwater family talks about. For example, how much do you remember dates of travel or things you did growing up as a kid? For me, not a lot. I can tell you, I went to this particular place, I did this particular thing. There's not a shot in hell I'm going to be able to tell you when it was. I couldn't tell you those dates. And to try to recall
Depends on the age. It depends on the age.
I don't know, man. Okay, what date did you take your kids to Disney World? What were the dates?
No, I couldn't give you a date, like a specific date, but I can tell you roughly, like, for example, when I was 10 years old in late July, early August, whatever year that was, if I had to do the math, I'd go back and tell you what year it was. I went to London to visit my aunt who was working there.
Right.
And so, like, that was a trip I went on. I know how old I was. I know it was the summertime. I know roughly what month it was. And it just so happened it was like 2 weeks before Princess Diana was murdered.
Right.
I had to say it like that because it's a conspiracy podcast. Anyway, point being, I think it depends on the age, right? If you're 5 years old, you're probably not going to remember a lot. But if you're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you can kind of, you can figure that out a little bit easier, I think.
I think the general idea, sure, but the actual specific dates, to me, I always call that into question because I just don't.
I agree 100%.
think that's plausible. And before we go on, I want to again set some bars here. The primary murders, there's a lot of murders that happen around this period, and a lot of them are attributed to the Zodiac Killer. There are, say, 4 that are probably guaranteed attributed to them, or I guess most people assume or agree on. That's Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, which was December 20th, 1968, Vallejo, California. There's Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell. Brian does not actually die here.
He survived, right?
He survives, correct. September 27th, 1969. Yeah. Yep, that's Lake Berryessa. There is, I'm sorry, that was the third one. The second one is Darlene, Ferrin, and Michael Mageau. Michael does also survive. That's July 4th, 1969. So you can see that's all within about a year span right there.
Yep.
Then you've got some that are kind of mixed in there that are credited. Kathleen Jones and Donna Lass are in the 70s. And you've also got Klein. What the heck's his name? Klein. It's slipping my mind right now. Was it Peter Klein? And that was the taxi driver. That was
in San Fran, right?
Yeah, and so right, and so he's generally considered like the last of the Zodiac Killer officially. There's some other people like Cherry Joe Bates that happened earlier on. I forgot what year in the 60s that some people attribute to it because it was a similar type of murder, and there was apparently a confession along the way somewhere along the lines. But again, and there's a bunch others that people have tried to tie into it.
What about, and if you don't know, I'll look it up real quick. there was a young couple that was murdered on the beach in the early 60s. I want to say it might have been 1963. Are you familiar with that one? They were found shot to death in kind of almost like a little shanty shack that was on the beach somewhere in California. I'll try to look it up.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that one specifically.
Again, I was going to say that might not be in the mainstream consensus of the Zodiac murders considered to be a Zodiac murder.
Okay, so Paul Stine was the other one I was thinking of. That's that was the cab driver there.
That was the
there's
cab
a Ray
driver, right.
Davis. That was another cab driver, Ray Davis, in '62. That could have been related. So again, there's other. Depending on what you watch, there are other cases that have sort of been like sucked in that people think that maybe he kind of traveled up the coast and so forth. For the sake of this discussion, we're going to talk about the Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Ferrin, Mageau, Shepard and Hartnell, Cecilia Shepard and Hartnell, and Paul Stine murders specifically, because that's really what's covered in this documentary, and those are generally accepted as the definitive killings. With the exception of Paul Stine, which happens in San Francisco, the other three murders all happen within the same area of Napa County, Vallejo, California, right? And so if you're this Stillwater or the Seawater family,
Yep.
it's not out of their own possibility to think that somebody like ALA is going around to all of these places fairly regularly. Why wouldn't he be?
Sure.
They're right. It's all within like a half an hour drive all over the place. And
Yeah.
I've got some maps that I'm going to pull up a little later. I don't want to spoil it yet because it gives away one of my talking points later. But we'll look at those maps and we'll see how close these actual murders were.
Yeah.
And so to say, oh, yeah, I was there with him. Well, yeah, of course you were there with him because it's not that far off. To go to Lake Berryessa, like, why wouldn't you have gone to the lake, To go up towards, like, where Lover's Lane was, where Betty Lou Jensen and Dave Faraday were, they were probably in the area. I doubt they were there late at night.
So they didn't claim to be at that specific one, but yes.
Right, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, something else I wanted to point out, too, that I got the impression through it, they eventually admitted to it in the docuseries, is the way it was being positioned, or the way I understood it, is Arthur Lee Allen, to me, seemed like he was the mother's lover to some degree. They don't fess up to that specifically there. And
they allude to it.
They allude to it quite a bit. And I think that the mother tried to keep that at arm's length. And they also eventually come out and say that it sounds like Arthur Lee Allen admitted to having raped the daughter, Connie, and the one son, and I forgot what his name is. He was the one that would go out to be, sex, drugs, rock and roll, talked a lot about becoming a little bit of a drug addict later on, tripping out all the time, things like that. That immediately discredits him to me. I know you got to give people a second chance, but that casts a shadow of doubt in my mind for later.
Really? I'm surprised to hear that.
Hugely.
So wait, what discredits it? Because he went on to live the lifestyle that most people did in the 60s and 70s and went full bore drugs, rock and roll? Like, I don't think that's necessarily discredits.
I don't really think he did drugs, rock and roll. I think it was the way he positioned it for himself. I'm assuming him is now a drug addict by the way he described himself.
Yeah.
And my inclination is the relationship with Connie, when she's married and then not married and comes back and spends a lot of time with him, is I think there was probably some inappropriate relations early on when she was a young girl, most likely.
Between her and ALA.
Between her and Arthur Lee Allen, yes. Right. And I think as she got older, I think those relationships probably could have become mutual. And I think she had more than a father-daughter relationship with him. I think there was something more to it, to some degree. I think he still had a relationship with the mother, and I think the mother was probably aware of the relationship with Connie. And I think the reason she wanted to keep them at arm's length and didn't want to open the box is because she didn't want the kids to know that she had this relationship with Arthur and knew that he was kind of a sketch individual, because he did go to prison.
Plausible.
And he went for prison for child molestation now, right? So
correct.
Here's why he's going away. She knows that this happened to her children. This guy's supporting her. She loves him. And, you're keeping it at arm's length. Now the brother finds out, right?
Yep.
Who are the only two people that know that he was admitted to that he was the Zodiac Killer? It's the brother and Arthur Lee Allen. And then the whole family stops talking to him. The reason they would do that, in my impression, is because he probably has a chronic lying problem with them. They became very estranged. And so now he's trying to cast doubt on this. He probably butt heads with the guy a lot. Maybe he wasn't even part of the molestation. That's not very clear in the documentary. He sort of says that it's admitted to him. I get the inclination that it's probably Arthur and the daughter, and maybe he tries to do it with other girls.
And I think it was more so, I mean, they say that he was drugged, right? Arthur does admit that he drugged him as well. And I kind of took that as, yeah, he very well could have also molested him as well while he was drugged. But I took it more as if it was a way to just push him to the side and get rid of him so that he could molest the sister. Right.
Well, because Connie specifically says that she tries to wake him up and he's already passed out. And she's hanging out with Arthur this whole time. They're going out. Right. And then eventually, they have some drinks together and she ends up passing out too. So that to me indicates an inappropriate relationship more so than anything else. And I think it's possible that brother realized it early on. Maybe he was conscious enough or had residual memories of it, and that's what pushes him out into this estranged travel and do drugs lifestyle. Maybe not. Don't know enough about it.
I do want to play devil's advocate real quick though, right? So, and you have a very good point, right? Is it very possible that he was a drug addict, was a chronic liar, caused a bunch of drama within the family, and that's why when he goes to the family and says, hey, Mr. Allen told me that he's the Zodiac Killer, we need to go to the police, they completely shun him and say, get the fuck out of here, we're done with your shit? Absolutely could be. It could also be that they looked at him sort of like a father figure, right? I mean,
absolutely.
For 90, I'm going to say 99% of the documentary, this family talks about ALA in very high regard, how much they loved having him around, everything that he did for them. So maybe it was like, I can't believe that you're accusing somebody that is so close to our family of doing something that's so heinous.
I
very well could be that as well.
I'm totally on board with what you're saying there. What I will throw back towards you, too, as consideration is oftentimes when a married couple gets divorced and they separate. So at some point the biological father distances himself from this family. It's really unclear how the family's all connected, how all these kids, where they all came from, if it was the same father, multiple fathers. But the brother in question here, I want to say his name is David. I don't really remember. But it's
something with a D. Could have been a Doug or a David.
Yeah. So let's just, D here, Seawater. I think he's the oldest, if not the second oldest child here. And my inclination is that perhaps he's got residual hatred for this guy that is stepping into this family as a new father figure. And perhaps that he's had this lingering hatred over a period of time, which happens often in divorces.
Sure.
And I've known personal situations where even though the father was a scumbag, the eldest son gravitated towards him and held on to that, despite the fact that the guy treated him like shit for a long period of time, because it's still like that masculine figure and they weren't ready for somebody else.
Of course.
So, again, planting the seeds, you can go either way on those pieces. It's fine. What I would move on to next. My issue with the documentary is it doesn't touch the ciphers at all. It glosses over them.
Okay.
It glosses over them. It says that they're there. Okay?
Sure.
The problem with that is in Zodiac lore, he gives his name in one of the letters. Okay? And it's lettered out. Now, I didn't refresh on the ciphers because I just didn't have clearly enough time to do that in preparation for here. But I remember a lot of people always refer to him in this world as Arthur Lee Allen, but he went as Lee Allen. If I recall correctly, the cipher letters didn't add up to that. It basically excluded him from that. He also, for all intents and purposes, for everything, just the way he was described within the video, within the docuseries, he was an idiot. I mean, yes, he was an elementary school teacher, but for the most part, he seemed just like a big loaf, like a bumbling idiot. Yeah. Fine. I'm not judging a book by its cover necessarily, but there's no real indication that he had... Gosh, there you go. He's a Fetterman. My goodness gracious. Very much so. Yeah, watch a Rogan Fetterman. You'll understand. But the ciphers were all done. Like, this person is creating their own ciphers, their own keys, and then they're encoding messages. They're using sophisticated language, like duality in certain words, and they're intentionally changing the spelling of words that they spell correctly later. To throw people off the cipher.
They intentionally misspell stuff, yes. But they use good grammar. His English was always very good.
Right, which doesn't align with the type of person Arthur Lee Allen is. I mean, he spent his latter years most of his late years living in a trailer. If he's this
that is true, which I found odd.
Right, and if he has this much intellect, I understand that, yes, he becomes a criminal and goes to jail, so on and so forth. But if he's got this much intellect, I would be inclined to think he'd be doing more than working all of these odd jobs. Because he was only a teacher for a small period of time, and then was out of that too. That doesn't add up to me. So my theory on the mother thing is just that. The key here is his deathbed confession. He swears he's not the Zodiac Killer. He's dying. True. This is it. He insists that he's not. Now,
in fact, as per... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off. As per the documentary, when he's found, face down, dead on the floor, he has a letter in his hand to the police, essentially stating, like, guys, please knock it off. Like, give it a rest. I'm not the Zodiac. Which I do find interesting.
I'm not the Zodiac. Right. And somebody like the Zodiac, if you analyze their personality and the way they were clamoring for attention, why would you not want to take the credit? Why would you go to your grave? You're going to your grave. Why would you do that and not just fess up to it? Because that is the ultimate I gotcha. It doesn't make sense because the Zodiac was clamoring for attention from A to Z. There was never a point they weren't looking for attention. They were courting them from the school bus things all the way through. They were teasing the police. They were teasing journalists. Yeah. So it didn't make sense to me there. None of it made sense. Now, what I was going to say before is that doesn't exclude him from being a murderer. They talk about Cherry Joe Bates. That's the killing that happened in the earlier 60s down in Riverside, California, outside the college, right?
Yes.
I don't think it's implausible that he has some implication in a murder where he was trying to assault someone and maybe it went bad, like a Cherry Joe Bates, and killed her. And I think maybe what could have been lingering on his mind was that he did kill somebody and he did want to admit to it. But they tied this all to the Zodiac, right? And so if I admit to one, I am the Zodiac Killer. And that could be the implications of what his letters mean and why he continues to say, I just wanted to come out and say I was the Zodiac Killer. This is a tactic that police have, and we've seen this a lot, where they take innocent people and police have beat them down to believe that they're, and they just say, you're right, admit. And if somebody that has any degree of guilt, like this guy did already with the child molestation stuff, maybe now he did kill somebody along the way, and he wants to fess up to it, but he knows if I say I did it, it's not going to be a case. They're going to pin everything on me, and then I'm ruined. Then I'm getting the death penalty. Rather than he kills this one girl, maybe he lives out his life in prison. He gets lucky. If they pin you with killing 13 people or 31 people, I think is the high count.
You go to the chair.
You're going right to the chair. You're Dunzo Italiano. Yeah.
So I have a question though. Before we stray too far from the ciphers, right? I know that's a big part of it.
I'm not going to tackle
how do you feel? Tonight. That's okay. How do you feel about the fact that in the documentary, his 4th grade class says he used to teach us how to create ciphers? Every Friday, he would give us a cipher and have us decode that. That, to me, is like, holy shit, dude. Like, we've talked about some of the other pieces of evidence thus far, and then you have a guy, and granted, I know we're relying on speculative, if you will, evidence of children that were in the 60s, they were in the 4th grade at that time, but it's an entire class of kids that said, he was my teacher, he used to have us decode ciphers. Like, that to me, that was, like, mind-blowing. Like, that was kind of early on in the docuseries, too, and that kind of hooked me. I was like, holy shit, he's the fucking Zodiac.
What happened in the 60s? What was a big event going on in the world?
I don't know, there was a lot of them. There was the moon landing, there was the Cold War, there was a lot of things that went on.
The Cold War. What was the Cold War?
Essentially what we've been doing with China for the past 50 years. I mean, it was a... it was a non... I mean, there was no actual combat between us and Russia, but there was an arms race. I mean, it was almost nuclear war with Russia.
It's espionage. It's gathering and stealing information, right? We look at ciphers and cryptography as this, like, kind of occult thing that nobody does, right? Because nobody does it right now. In the 60s, everybody was doing it. Everybody had interest in it. It was in newspapers. It was in books. They had detective magazines that literally would have ciphers that you would solve. It's quite literally in the movie The Christmas Story, where they were
I was just going to say, your favorite fucking movie, which I think is awful, by the way, The Christmas Story. Worst fucking movie ever made. He's waiting for his decoder ring to come in the mail. Right? Isn't he waiting for the quarter ring to come in the mail? Yeah.
Exactly.
Or not a ring or whatever, some kind of message or some shit like that. It tells him to like eat oatmeal or something.
He has the Red Rider bean gun.
Fucking shit.
Oh yeah, that's right. Anyway. Yeah, it's eat Ovaltine or something like that.
Yeah. Ovaltine, rich chocolate Ovaltine. You ever have Ovaltine?
Yeah. Maybe when I was a kid, I think.
I was gonna say I think I had it like once as a kid.
Like a knockoff, like Yoo-Hoo or something.
Or it was almost like Nesquik. I remember it was like a powder you really kind of like mix in.
Yes.
I'm sure they don't. I don't even think they make it anymore. It was probably like the last, like its last gasp in like the early '90s.
Hopefully, probably not.
Anyway.
But like this is not something that's uncommon for that era. Just like the Zodiac watch that Arthur Lee Allen had, that was not an uncommon brand of watch, especially in a Marine watch. Like, so when they grab these things, yes, I understand that it's very convenient, but it's not out of character. The other piece too is like you see the infamous photo of the Zodiac, which I will also bring up, but I don't want to bring up now because it invalidates my points later. But they have those thick black rimmed glasses. Today, they're coming back into style a lot more. You know, Mark Cuban and Rachel Maddow both wear them. Yeah, we got the same
Maddow,
thing.
whatever the fuck her name is.
But back then, you know, or for the last like 30 years, they really weren't. So to see that in a picture becomes very distinctive. Back in the 60s, that's what your glasses were. You could pull up any picture of a man wearing glasses in the 60s. They all pretty much have the same glasses.
You know what it makes me think of? The kid Paul from
The Wonder Years.
Jesus Christ, The Wonder Years. There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
Like those kind of glasses.
That's exactly it. Right. And what year was the Wonder Years set in?
It was in the 60s. I think it was 69, wasn't it? Might have been 69 specifically, but it was in the 60s.
It started probably right after the moon landing, or no, the moon landing happened within the middle of the series somewhere, maybe the first or second season.
So it was right around
it was in the mid 60s. Yeah. So you know, you gotta take these things within the context of the era it was. Okay, so that's why I dismiss a lot of that stuff. Again, the evidence is there; it's circumstantial, and what was said in this documentary is solely based on the Seawater family. There's plenty of other stuff that kind of links him towards it, brings him into it. He was a suspicious character. Now I want to go into the murders. Okay, and this is where I'm going to hope to try to change your mind, Tim. You have anything else on Arthur Lee Allen before I dive into this stuff?
In terms of evidence?
In terms of something that you think is just indisputable. Or do you just want to wait and see what I got for you?
I don't want to say it's indisputable. One thing I found quite odd, and again, you're relying on the truth of the Seawater family and those kids, but the hood that the Zodiac wore, and granted, we only have a police sketch, is really all we have. But the Seawater family tells you in this docuseries that they helped him create that hood, and it's exactly what it looked like. They used neoprene. They were essentially making a wetsuit because he was a diver. And they said it was funny looking, it was squared, it had little slits for the eyes. Again, we're relying on testimony from kids in the 60s. I get it, it's very circumstantial. You gotta believe the whole Seawater theory. But if you do, that's pretty damning.
Sometimes, in hearing these personal accounts years after the fact, I can't help but think about our Ghosts episode that was delayed from YouTube, and Ed and Lorraine Warren. And sometimes you embellish some things because you're selling something. They have a Netflix documentary to sell. Okay? And there's something else I want to talk about selling later. Now, I want to talk about the murders. We've got Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. They're the first two people to be murdered on December 20th, 1968. They basically pull up to a spot called Lover's Lane. They're going there probably to hook up. They're on a date, so on and so forth. By all accounts, everyone always says everybody's a great person when they die. Of course they do, but these two people, these two kids were allegedly really good people. David was, you know, very active in his community, active in his school. I think like an ROTC type recruit at that particular time. I don't know, in his school, in that vein of kid. It was double homicide there, and the couple was parked on Lake Herman Road when they were shot. Jensen, Betty Lou Jensen, was found lying on her back, and Faraday was found slumped over in the front seat of the car. Each had been shot multiple times. Now, Faraday was shot in the car, dead in the car. Jensen looked like she had got out of the car and ran away, and she was shot as she was running away. Okay. So immediately the first thing, this is pinned on the Zodiac Killer. How do you know it's the Zodiac Killer? What's the first notification you have that this is somebody, that somebody did this intentionally?
Don't recall off the top of my head. Shoot, let me know.
So eventually, there's a letter that's written to 3 different newspapers, and it's taking claim for the murders.
Right, and he says, "Hey, this is who I am. I'm the one that killed the couple on Lover's Lane." Blah blah blah.
Correct. That letter comes 7 months after this murder.
Right. Which
Seems
is a
unusual.
little... Right.
Very unusual. Okay? Now I'm going to bring up my first of many, 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 many screen shares tonight. And this one's going to be of the crime scene, and it is a composite image. So it's important to remember that for those that are watching this online. Okay? And for those that are not, I'll describe it. Okay? You have to go based on ballistics because this is where they found the bullet casings for the gun that was used here. I believe this crime scene was a .22. And effectively, where you see all the blue, it doesn't look like my cursor showing there, but it's relevant. But where all you see the blue dots, that is somebody standing effectively leaning into the car, shooting and dropping casings right there. It looks like they're probably shooting out towards Betty Lou Jensen's, maybe my guess, because she's running off. But then you see these 2 red dots over here, right? There's a green one there. That's another bullet. There's 2 red ones over there. Okay?
Yep.
The casings are about 10 feet out and over. This was reported that this car showed up here by somebody that was passing by. They swatted it. They ID'd the car and so forth. Why would there be a bullet on the passenger side of this car?
I don't know. That's a good question. Why would there be?
Okay. Now, it's important to recognize that there is a hole in the door right here, and then David was shot basically in his ear, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's a theory, a prevailing theory out there where I'm going to borrow a lot from tonight. This is the myth of the Zodiac Killer. Okay. That this car pulls up and 2 people are in the car. Somebody gets out of the passenger side seat and shoots. Either they hit the car here and they start walking around and shoot again, and that's the one that hit David, or vice versa, right? Betty Lou books it out of the car and gets out of there. Somebody runs, whoever's in the driver's seat, comes over to here, and they start firing, and that's where all these casings come from in the blue.
Okay. So that would mean that there were 2 different shooters? Is that what we're saying?
There's 2 different people that were at this scene. Otherwise, what you're saying is the driver pulls up, gets out of the car, walks all the way around the car, and decides to fire off shots over here. Makes no sense. What makes sense is they pulled up, this person gets out, shoots again, and then doesn't realize this chick's getting the fuck out of here. She busts out of the car and starts running.
Okay. Very well could be.
Think about that.
Very well could be.
Why would this happen? Why would somebody get out and do this to just some 2 random people? Unless, of course, there's a backstory. Do you think there's a backstory, Mr. Phillips?
I'm going to guess that you have a backstory for us.
So, our friend David Faraday, but there's my notes right there. So there's obviously some clear evidence right there of the shootings, but our friend David Faraday has a police report that was filed days before this incident happens. He's at, call it like a diner or a breakfast shop or something like that. There was a big drug problem that was going on in the 60s and the 70s, and drugs were infiltrating schools. David was just like your typical, like your goody two-shoes type kid, like your Captain America, if you will, and approaches some kids that were notorious for selling drugs in the school, calls them out publicly in this diner. There's an incident that occurs. I don't know if it's a scuffle, a fight. I'm really not too clear on that, but there is a police report that is filed on this, and basically says to the effect that I'm going to take you down and I'm going to get you stopped. He's going to report them. He's going to prove it. He's going to get evidence. He's shot a couple days later. Now, seems unusual that a bunch of high school kids would do that, except if you look at the bigger picture. In the 1960s in California, motorcycle gangs were running rampant. They were trafficking drugs at a high rate. They were also very, very violent. If they thought that this kid, maybe this wasn't the first incident, we don't know, it's happened in the 60s or
sure,
the same thing. If they thought that this kid was a threat, he comes up, he puts a bullet in this kid. They're going to kill her. The chick gets away, sees them, they shoot her down. You got no witnesses. They pull out of there. They get the hell out of there. Hold your thoughts on that for now, okay?
Okay.
Because this is the Zodiac Killer. And when the Zodiac sends his letter, he doesn't take credit for Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen alone. He takes credit for 2 murders. The next one is Blue Rock Springs, and that's July 4th, 1969. Again, just about 6 to 7 months later. Darlene Ferrin is killed, and Michael Mageau survives. Very similar story. Let me jump back up to my other notes here. They're
is this the couple at the lake or no? No, this is different.
No, this is not a lake. No.
Okay.
The couple at the lake was laying on a blanket in broad daylight.
Yes.
This couple, Ferrin and Mageau, are parked in a car when they're approached by a man who opens fire with a gun. Ferrin, the woman, was killed, while Mageau survived despite being shot several times. And the killer later claimed responsibility for this crime, sent in the local newspaper. Ferrin was shot 9 times. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that.
Okay. So he was the first 50 Cent, is what you're saying. He was 50 before 50.
50 Cent. Now, why is this murder relevant? Again, I have to ask you, who would target these two people? Is there a motive?
Sure
what do you think two kids were doing sitting parked in just a random spot? Blue Rock Springs Park. Two people
I know
parked
what I
in a
used to
park.
do when I would park with girlfriends in a random spot, so I could guess.
What if I told you that Darlene Ferrin was married?
Oh, spicy.
What if I told you that Michael Mageau was not her husband?
Okay. Now we're getting somewhere.
Darlene is parked with Michael at night in a car. Somebody comes up and shoots her aggressively, shoots her 9 times, and basically clips Michael. Doesn't seem to be going after Michael, seems to be going directly after her. Seem odd?
Yeah, it definitely seems odd. It seems like there could be a motive there, for sure.
It seems like there could be a motive. The motive continues because this is not Darlene's first marriage. It's actually her second. And her first husband, her ex-husband, has a history documented in crime and police reports of being violent. His name is James Phillips Crabtree, and he went by other names through periods of time. James Crabtree later gets interviewed in a 2023 documentary, and he says that I said to Darlene when we broke up, as soon as we came back to California, they moved to New York for a period of time. They come back to California, and, she falls in love with the first guy she sees, which is eventually her second husband. And I told her, this is going to come back and get you 9 times over.
9 times over.
Now, this is a guy that is pleading his own innocence in 2023, and he decides to use the phrase 9 times over and then go and accent, and she got 9 times. How poetic is that? This is a direct quote from what he's saying. I tried to get the clip up here. I could not get it on YouTube, so I didn't want to go and grab it just in case we get in trouble there.
So real quick, she was married once before.
She was married to this guy named James.
So she was married. Then they got divorced. She's remarried.
Yep.
And she's essentially having an affair at the same point in time. While
There's
she's
no
married
confirmation
to her second
she's
husband.
having an affair.
No confirmation, but we could put 2 and 2 together.
Right. And her second husband sort of just says that, she liked to dance a lot, and I would be out working, so she'd go out with friends, but I was always told that it was nothing.
Yeah.
It's a little sketchy to me. It's
right.
Especially since she has a history now from the first husband, suggestively. Now I'm going to show you my second screen share of the day, and this is going to be a picture, excuse me, of Darlene Ferrin. Right here.
Okay. Hey, Darlene.
Darlene. Who's this look like?
Looks like Paul from the Wonder Years. No, I genuinely don't know.
It does look like Paul from the Wonder Years. You're not wrong in that.
Actually, it kind of looks like the police sketch.
It does look like the police sketch, doesn't it?
It does. He does look like the police sketch of the Zodiac.
So,
supposedly.
This man went mysterious for many, many years, and it is it's not confirmed because you won't confirm it, but it is, with all intents and purposes, believed to be Darlene's first husband, James Phillips Crabtree. Now, when he saw this picture,
name, by the way.
they're two. It's not hyphenated, but separate names. I think he went by James Phillips for a while, or Jim Phillip or something like that. Now,
No relation to me.
No relation to Mr. Phillips. I hope not. So in any case, this James Phillips has denied, obviously, this photo. And in that same documentary in 2023, they show him this picture. He's like, this guy's such a nerd, or such a dork, whatever he was saying. He's like, I don't know why they keep thinking this is me. He's like, I got her this sweater because she was getting knee surgery or something like that. That was the doctor that did the that worked on her knee or that fixed up her knee or something. Just an unusual picture to take with your doctor after you fix the knee.
Yeah, I would agree.
So some internet sleuths out there went and dug up his old high school photo and put it side by side with this photo. And I could not find that one on the internet. I have to pull up the documentary again to find it. I mean, you can pretty much say it's identical. His teeth are a little more fucked up, but he's also smiling a little bit differently. They're almost a spitting image of one another.
Okay, very
and
interesting.
He follows through. Very interesting. So now you've got motive in Darlene Ferrin. You've got motive in David Faraday. How are they connected? A letter now goes into the San Francisco Chronicle, amongst other newspapers.
There was two others, right?
Yeah, there's.
We're talking about the original letter, right? The very first
the original
letter.
The very first letter, which is now claiming ownership of both murders, right there. Okay. How does that happen? How are they connected? Why would they be connected? How does this letter come into play? Don't know that I have an answer for that just yet. Okay. Right after this attack, the Darlene and Michael Mageau attack, there's a phone call to the police, to the operator, giving the exact location of where this murder just happened, claiming I just killed two people. Basically saying, I
kind of confessing.
Let me backtrack. What?
Kind of confessing.
Yes, basically goes up the road. Remember, there's no cell phones at the spine. Finds a payphone, says, "There's two people, Blue Rock Springs. Take a right up here. Blah blah blah." Tells them how to get there. They're dead. It's a man and woman. Man and woman. The cars. Blah blah blah. So on and so forth. The car that Darlene Ferrin was driving. Allegedly, people saw a similar car to hers. I forgot the name of the car off the top of my head. That pulled in, and that was allegedly the one that executed the murder. This James Phillips Crabtree, that was their car together. He had the exact same car. I think it was a Corsair. And so when they split up, she went and got her own Corsair. And they had a very almost identical Corsairs at separate times in life when they would have re-encountered himself here.
Okay.
James Philip Crabtree's alibi is that he was doing acid in the woods because it was the 4th of July. And he apparently ran into a judge that waved him off, but there's no record of that anyway. And he apparently was a half hour away. Very essential. He's a lunatic. He lives in the woods of Oregon now. So he calls, he ties these cases together, and then he on that phone call claims that he also killed the other two people. Why would you do that?
Pause. So he's admitting to this one murder, of Darlene, and then he's also saying, "Hey, you remember those kids that were shot on Lover's Lane in Vallejo? I killed them too." Okay, very interesting.
Okay. This is before the letter gets there. This is the night of this murder.
This is before the letter. Okay.
This is before the letter. The letter comes about 3 weeks later. Okay. Now, why would you do that? Whenever there's a murder, who's the very first people that the police look at every single time?
It's usually a spouse or a significant other.
Or an ex-husband. Especially an ex-husband that has a criminal history. So now you look at the current husband, you look at the ex-husband, especially because you found him with a guy there, right?
Sure.
How do you exonerate yourself but to make this look like a serial murder? Because now, if you're tying the murders together, right, they don't have a resolution for the other murder. They're still looking for that. And they know what the MO is. The bullets in this case are different. He's using a 9mm Luger here, and he describes that on the phone. The other one was a 22.
It's a 22, so right.
Slightly different MO. Okay? It's very similar in a lot of ways, but now you can't just paint him to this case. You have to tie him to that one as well.
Sure.
Because now you're thinking it's a serial murder. So casting some doubt in there. We're going to move on to Lake Berryessa, the stabbing.
Okay.
That's Brian Hartnell, who did survive, and Cecilia Shepard. This one happens in the dead of the day. September 22nd,
very different. Couldn't be more different.
Everything about it is different. I guess not the dead of the day. It was probably like 7 p.m., but it was still daylight out. 6 to 7 p.m. The gist of it is Hartnell and Shepard were relaxing by the lake. They were formerly a couple way back in the day. They had reconnected at their college. They decided to spend the day going out to the lake to hang out, catch up, maybe hook up, maybe try to rekindle. Don't really know. But anyway, they're relaxing by a lake. A man approaches them brandishing a gun, ties them up, shoots Shepard multiple times before stabbing Hartnell. Hartnell survives and was able to provide a description of the attacker, who famously wore the hooded costume with the symbol that resembles the Zodiac's logo. Okay. some added context here. They're sitting there, and Cecilia Hartnell sees a guy out in the distance in the woods, kind of hiding behind some trees. Mm-hmm. And she starts telling Brian, and they're just sitting there like, all right, well, that's just like weird that he's like staring at us. Well, he keeps getting closer and closer. And then at one point he's walking towards them, and he's got this hood on now. Previously he didn't.
Yep.
Okay. Now he's got the hood on and he's walking up. But the hood is on, and it is very tight to his hair, to his head. So much so that you can see the parts in his hair is the way it's described by Hartnell. So you can see he's got very nice hair, and it's combed over and very well maintained. Okay? Mm-hmm. Important. And obviously you've got the Zodiac symbol in white right there. Seems kind of strange. Completely different MO. He has Hartnell, Cecilia, tie up Brian. I'm sorry. Has Shepard, I'm switching their names back and forth here. Has Cecilia tie up Brian, and then he ties up Cecilia, and he's basically just talking to them. He tells them he's going to like rob them and steal their shit. Ends up killing them. Okay. That all happens. They basically survive. Cecilia is alive when the cops get there. They get a little bit of a description from her. And, obviously Brian is the one that survives this thing altogether here.
Yep.
Now, looking at the previous murders, and when you're looking at a serial murder, one of the biggest things you have is MO. The Lake Berryessa attack does not fit the killer's MO. He's using a knife. He's appearing in a hooded costume with the Zodiac symbol in the middle of the daylight. Everything is different. Previously, he's rolling up in the darkness. He's in, he's out. He's not talking. He talked to them for 15 minutes before he kills them. Mm-hmm. He's never done that before. Why would you do that? Especially because somebody just survived. Okay? So, was that person that is blatantly coming out wearing a hood with a giant Zodiac symbol on her chest for the first and only time ever, is it like a red herring? Are you trying to paint a picture that you are somebody else? That's what
Is it a copycat murder?
Is it a copycat murder? There's important information that's often overlooked, and it's come out, and if you look hard enough, you can find it. There's actually 3 other girls from the college that were there that know those two and saw those two walking up as they were about to leave. They saw this guy, and this guy was stalking them for about 45 minutes, but he was in between them and their car, and so they didn't go over there. And they vividly know who he is. And so that's going to bring up to our next screen share. Okay. I got to find them all.
So these 3 girls state that they saw this person stalking them, and they know exactly who it was.
No, they don't know who the person stalking them, who it was, but they're able to give a description of him.
Got it.
Okay? And that's how they come up with a composite sketch.
Gotcha.
Okay? Let me go here. They can describe him, they can describe his looks, and so forth. There are 2 composite sketches on your screen right now.
It couldn't look more different, by the way.
Who's the Zodiac Killer?
So the guy on the left looks more like ALA.
Does, yep.
I know that's not who we're talking about right now, but in my opinion, the guy on the left looks like ALA. The one on the right looks more like Darlene's boy.
So the guy on the right, that is the accepted look of the Zodiac Killer. That's the sketch that most people believe. This guy on the left, this was a sketch that was composited both from Brian Hartnell's account and those 3 college girls' account.
Okay.
And when the college girls saw this, like, this is exactly who it is. Yeah, they described the exact same thing. So they are convinced that this is the most accurate depiction of who it is. Now, notably,
so the guy on the left with the darker hair?
Correct. Very dark hair.
Well, you're just adding fuel to my fire, because that looks like Arthur Lee Allen.
Does it, though? Because Arthur Lee Allen didn't really have this head of hair, and his chin is chiseled. This is also a young 20-year-old guy, and he's very svelte. He's not very overly big.
Which would not fit the description of ALA at that point.
Does not fit the description of Arthur Lee Allen at that particular point. Okay.
Right.
Now, this particular killer also happens to go up to the car door. He writes the dates of the other killings on there, and then writes today's date with the Zodiac symbol. It seems like they're going above and beyond, out of their way, to make you know that this is the Zodiac, when the MO of the Zodiac up to this point has been, I'm going to tell you later. I'm going to tell you later. I'll give you all the details. I'll give it to you later. Doesn't do that here. He's making it known now. Very strange. Okay. So who killed these people? What would be the MO? I don't have an MO for that. I don't.
Okay.
But I have an anomaly. That day in Lake Berryessa, there's people on duty, right? The person that responds first to the murders, to go find their bodies, is a park ranger by the name of Dennis Land. I think there was somebody else that responded as well, like a fisherman, but the park ranger on duty that comes up is named Dennis Land. Okay? He checks out of his log saying that he's going to be like surveying a certain area and like go dark about 6 o'clock. He's usually supposed to check back in within 45 minutes into the log. Doesn't do that. He's not accounted for at all. Okay? So he's got all this time that's missing from his log. He's the first to arrive on the scene. He's got a military background. He's very well trained. He's a park ranger, which is not like, it's not like a mall security card. There is training that you have to go through to get to the
Sure.
Before the police get there, he cleans up the entire crime scene. He picks up their blanket, picks up all their stuff, puts it in a box, brings it back to the ranger station, cleans everything up. So when the police arrive, there's nothing there. Where's the crime scene? It's like, oh, I got it for you in a box right here. You're a trained military man. You're a trained park ranger, and you tampered with a crime scene. It's very unusual. Okay.
I think we got to look at it. There's a few things there, right? So yes, he was in the military. That doesn't make him a detective, right? That's number one. Number two, what we knew about forensics back in the 60s is very different from what we know in 2024. However, it's very bizarre, in my opinion, that you would clean up a crime scene in any way, shape, or form for any reason at all whatsoever. That is very bizarre.
You want to make it more bizarre?
Let's go.
Brian Hartnell says, I'm unclear to who it is, but I believe it's the other guy, the fisherman that might be there. He's coming back when he sees Dennis Land walking back over to them. Because he looks very similar to the guy that they saw in the woods. And then, of course, when Dennis gets there, now Brian is bleeding out and blacking out, right?
Right.
So maybe he's losing consciousness. He doesn't really know. And that's where it's basically chalked up to, is that like, oh, I just
Sure.
It ended up just being the person on duty. Just becomes a little odd. Now, I saw a picture of this guy. I don't know that he matches this composite sketch really exactly. His chin is not as chiseled. His chin actually looks like the other sketch a little bit more. I couldn't find his picture to pull up. So that one obviously leaves a little bit of a weight there, but it does seem disconnected. Okay? I'm going to jump into the Presidio Heights murder. That's Paul Stine. That's the cab driver.
Before we do that, I want to ask you one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about the fact that ALA was at the lake that day, was pulled over, was ticketed for speeding, and the police questioned him about a bloody knife or knives? I think it might have been more than one. I think it was 2 bloody knives that were on the front seat, the front passenger seat. It's pretty bizarre. His story was that he used it to kill chicken. Look, I know the world is a different place today. I know most people aren't out there killing their own chickens unless you're on a ranch. 99% of Americans aren't doing that. And it's just circumstantial evidence, but it's pretty fucking weird.
Very weird.
It's pretty weird.
It's very weird. You know what else is weird is when they found all those like dead animals in his freezer.
Yeah.
Right? Except when you think that this guy has no money and he's kind of shot. He's probably just hunting his own food. And he's probably just eating whatever the frick he can find, right? So it's like...
Very well could be.
It's weird. I don't have all the answers.
Sure.
For sure. But to me, I'm looking at each of these situations independently. And I'll tell you why in another moment when we get a little deeper. Presidio Heights murders Paul Stine's the cab driver, okay?
Okay.
The long and short of it is, I don't even have the full write-up of the actual murder, but basically this, who alleges to be the Zodiac Killer, gets in the car, takes a cab ride, takes it over to Presidio Heights, gets out, shoots the guy. Shoots Paul Stine, walks off. The police are called. Police apparently encounter him, and that's how we got that other sketch. That was the encounter. Yes. They think they encountered this particular guy, and he was the one that was actually the Zodiac Killer. I think he later takes claim for that as well.
Yeah, they encounter him, and they're like, hey, did you see anything? And he's like, yeah, he went that way.
Yeah, he went that way, right. And then he sends in like a piece of Paul Stine's shirt into the newspaper room, into the media, and that becomes like the big story that's how he's tied into.
Yeah, and that's the weird part, right? And I don't know how much I don't know how much this particular part of the story really matters, but just kind of an odd piece of the story is apparently he takes Paul Stine's shirt, draped in blood, and rubs it all over the cab. And there's two witnesses from a building, I don't know if it was across the street, but somewhere near, said that it looked like he was rubbing something all over the cab. Well, essentially it was Paul Stine's shirt, and he was rubbing blood all over the cab. I don't really know what that means. It's a
Probably
weird
trying
part
to
of the
rub
story.
off his fingerprints is my inclination.
Very well could be, right. Very well
Ruined
could
the
be.
crime scene if he was trying to do that. So what's interesting about this murder is it does not fit any aspect of the MO whatsoever.
It's, right.
Again, he's taking a cab somewhere with somebody. He's out in a very public setting. It's not a couple. It's a single guy. It does not align whatsoever.
Yep.
Why is it the Zodiac? The only reason it's even tied to the Zodiac is because that letter that goes into the newsroom with the piece of the shirt saying that I'm the Zodiac, I did this, here's the shirt to prove it. And of course they do prove that. They know it's part of Paul Stine's shirt.
Yeah.
So what do we think happened here? Why is this disconnected? Why does this one matter? Obviously the eyewitness testimonies are all over the place. Nobody really knows what happened. The police testimonies aren't really that reliable there either. But then you have to look back to California. Again, Presidio Heights is a shithole in San Francisco. And at this particular time...
San Francisco being a shithole? No way.
Not a lot's
Who would have
changed,
thought?
Tim, in 50 years. At this particular time, the reason the cops didn't think anything of it was because cabbies were getting robbed all the time. And in fact, Paul Stine's wallet was missing. So he was robbed. That is way out of character for the Zodiac. Now, Arthur Leon, maybe it's not out of character because we think he's struggling with money, so on and so forth. Fine.
Sure.
Arthur Leon doesn't really look like the guy in the sketch the police have, so we're completely different people at this point now. Beyond that, it's happening like every single day. People are getting robbed or murdered in this area. They take the cab there, they get out, and they rob the guy. Happens all the time. So it's not unusual for that to happen.
Happens,
all right,
all the time today, too. I mean,
I
remember back in, like, the mid to early 2000s, there was a rash of livery cab drivers in the city. When I say the city, I'm talking about New York, that were just being killed and robbed all the time. So it still happens.
So, I mean, the tie-in here is the shirt. And so how do we come about getting that shirt into the media?
Right.
And that wraps in my entire point of why I think this is a giant hoax, or why I now believe it's a giant hoax. What's your opinions on the media today in 2024?
The legacy media is dead. They are full of shit.
They're full of shit. Why are they full of shit?
Because they have an agenda that they want to push.
And why do they want to push that agenda? What does that do for them?
Well, they want to push that agenda because they have specific motives, and that agenda supports their motive, but also because, and this is going to go a little bit deeper here, that 99% of the media is owned by one person. But yeah.
Beyond that, like, is there a goal in mind? Like, when they push a certain agenda and they're pushing certain stories?
Well, because they want to accomplish certain things. They want to write a narrative for some specific reason, whatever that reason might be. They want to push their own agenda. They want to use that narrative to push their agenda, and that's
really dancing around my point here.
Things. Well, then get to it, baby. Get to it.
My point, what I'm trying to push you to, I'm trying to bait you to the well here. They're pushing a narrative that they think is going to make them money. What makes them money? A story about how a kitten, got rescued out of the middle of the street, or a story about how a presidential candidate is leading a hate rally in Madison Square Garden, right?
Yeah.
The negative always does.
Sure.
My inclination is a combination of here, and here's where my theory comes in. And this is pulling from a guy named Thomas Horan, Professor Thomas Horan, who really introduced this myth of the Zodiac Killer theory, right? I've amended what he's done in my own theory. He just sort of thinks it's all disconnected, and I don't. In the 60s, or especially in the 60s and the 70s, people think corruption in cops is bad now. The 60s and 70s, it was fucking brutal. They saw you, didn't like you, they beat the piss out of you. And there are so many cases, for all you true crime buffs out there are dozens of cases where they would just grab some like shit criminal and pin a murder on that person. I remember watching a series about like a young girl that got like killed or something like that. And there was like a serial murder going on. And they just they wrote it off and they just pinned it on somebody else. And the serial murderer kept going around because they pinned it on somebody else and they thought the case was closed. They didn't think they were linked, despite the fact that they very obviously were. And
well, it's an easy way to get it off their back, right? Like,
it's an easy way to get it off their back. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Now, you have this initial murder that happens with Faraday. Okay, there's biker gangs running up and down the roads. They're drug trafficking. And if there's anything that we've learned from drug trafficking, from the government, from any sort of drugs, is that oftentimes there's some sort of corruption involved that is allowing them to run rampant. Somebody's pockets are getting paid. This biker gang, let's say, hypothetically goes out and kills Faraday. It's got to get covered up. Because if it doesn't, there's going to be people asking questions. Well, then this other murder happens in Blue Rock Springs. So how do you cover it up? Well, you tie it to a serial killer. You tie it together because all these unsolved murders, you already know the answer to the first murder. Now you have an unsolved one. Let's link them together. But now we have to find a culprit that matches in here. And this is where other people come in, like the news is getting involved. But now you have to build a story. I struggle to know if the Zodiac letters are real or not. I think that somebody could have sent it. I think it's very, very, very plausible that Darlene Ferrin's ex-husband, James Phillips Crabtree, could have sent it. Because again, in that same documentary I watched in his interview, he claims to have been a cryptographer, and a very good one, in the military.
Very
It's a weird thing to say when you're trying to prove your innocence. But my inclination is that he's trying to sort of pull people off of his trail. So he takes credit for both. He writes the letter in there, takes credit for all of that. The police now look at this and say, oh shit, like, well, we could just tie this right in. That absolves this corruption that's going on there. We'll tie it all in and we'll find the person involved with it and just dump this on their shoulders anyway. So now Crabtree gets away with murder. The biker gang gets away with murder. I don't know how the Lake Berryessa comes in there. I honestly think it's somebody that, for whatever reason, is going to, maybe he's attracted to her. Maybe he was just a weirdo, a psycho. I think he very well wanted to turn people away and make them think it was something else, and went that route. He could have also been looped into the corruption. He could have just been a patsy that says, you have to make this move forward and pin it on somebody else. They're trying to pin it on, let's say, an Arthur Lee Allen, right? Maybe that was the goal. You try to dump it on somebody that you know is a scumbag that just got arrested for child molestation. You take this off his back.
It could have also been, speaking of the lake, it was a Lake Berryessa, am I saying that correctly? The Lake Berryessa murders could have been a serial killer. And it could have been the first murder that they committed. And they're looking at this Zodiac character that's been portrayed in the media, and he's taking on this role of, I'm the fucking Zodiac, baby. That's me. And this is the first one that I did, and boom. Now you actually do have a Zodiac. Whether he continued to kill more people or not, now you actually have a real one. Could be too.
Well, so this now leans into my point of this continues on, right? So you've got all these murders that go on there. Then all of a sudden you've got this Paul Stine in Presidio Heights. Now, all of these murders, and this is where we're going to go to a map, take place pretty much within the same area.
Right.
And I'm not even going to bring up this map because it's not really working very well. In any case, they take place... maybe I can. Hold on 1 second. Let me try this again.
Well, most of them take place in more southern California, right? Not that it's super... Well, it's not like San Diego.
No, they're all pretty much in the same place here. Yeah.
But it's not as close to San Francisco, though, no?
Yeah, it's pretty close to San Francisco.
Oh, is it? All right, I take that back.
Yeah, so here's Vallejo, California, right here. Okay. Here's Lake Berryessa up here. But I mean, for the most part, you're seeing the activity all in the same this concentrated region right here, which I don't know if you can see my cursor. I don't think so.
Yeah,
but you see the little skull right there, the Blue Rock Springs. There's Lake Herman. There's Lake Berryessa. I mean, these are all right next to each other, right?
Sure.
Here's a location where they reported the Lake Berryessa. So this isn't a far drive right here. So the San Francisco one is not far geographically, but it just seems out of the scope of what you do. Like, why would you come all the way down here and just random cabbie? It doesn't add up. So we go back to the shirt. Right. It's very weird. It doesn't make sense. And this is where your boy Arthur Lee Allen lived in his trailer. So is he close to it? Yes. But again, if you're tying him to all this, to go all the way down to San Francisco to Cabby doesn't make sense. And even some of these murders, like, these are destinations for him. He's going to a lake. He's going down here because there's other, I don't know why this is not letting me zoom in. There's another lake right here. Like, there's things for him to do in these areas to connect with people. Now, why did
And
I
he was
say
a
the
diver,
media?
so he was a diver, so it would make sense that he would be going to different bodies of water to dive.
Sure, he's looking for shit. Now, I keep talking about the media. I talked about corrupt police officers. I'm going to go back to the media again here because Paul Stine becomes a big one. How does somebody that's not at the crime scene get a piece of this guy's shirt? Well, you can go back to the police theory. Corrupt police. Seems a little unlikely that they're going to risk their job taking it out, mailing it out to, I keep wanting to say news station, but it's just like a media conglomerate, a newspaper.
Right.
Until you start to understand how media worked in the 1960s. It's not like today where everything's segregated. In the 1960s, and this is a verifiable fact, you can actually ask the detectives who were asked that worked in that precinct at that time. Media had direct access to police stations. The direct access precincts, they were in the rooms which would effectively be the crime labs of today. They were in there.
Right.
And most often, what they would do is they would actually be the ones taking the witness statements for the police, write it up, and then go write it out into paper. Police relied on them.
Yeah, it was very different.
They worked very in conjunction. So you get Paul Stine murdered. You've got his shirt right there. It's sitting in a bucket. It's drying out in a crime lab. It's already ripped. What's to say you don't have a media guy go in there, snip, pull that out, mail himself a letter because, hey, this
it's a big
story is killing it. We're making boatloads of money. How do we continue this on? Nobody died here. Well, nobody died intentionally. This was an accidental murder, or not accidental, or this is a separate murder. Like, they're not committing the murder, but they're tying it together.
Right, the murder already happened, so they're not doing anything quote-unquote wrong.
Right.
You can call it immoral, but they're not killing anybody.
Exactly. Where this gets stranger is after the Paul Stine letter. There's somewhere between 18 to 28 other letters are written claiming to be the Zodiac, right?
Yeah.
Those are largely ignored as not... Some people think they're true. Most people don't. Because the style changes, the verbiage changes. There's no real killings associated to them. The real Zodiac letters are a handful, like 3 or 4 of them, I think, total.
Right.
Then
If I remember correctly, the forensics on the handwriting analysis were very different as well.
Not even just the handwriting analysis. In that same 2023 documentary, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, they send it out to this other forensic group, but they're more like linguists. I mean, I'm talking about linguistics, but they're linguists.
So they're looking at the language that somebody uses and looking at the patterns.
Right.
I don't even know what a linguist is, but I put your context clues, baby. Let's go.
Exactly. So effectively what they did when they did their analysis, and they did some other really big ones too. So like they've got a lot of credibility in the space. I think they're from France or something. And effectively what they did is they analyzed the pattern of speech across all the letters from the very beginning to the very end. And what they're looking for is not the patterns and how he's writing or the way he's writing, because people will change that intentionally. Sometimes they'll have somebody else write it for them. They're like, that's fine, because especially in the 60s, people would think about that. What they're looking for is the small words. So the use of like the or to. And then all of a sudden, instead of using the and everything, they're using her or him.
Gotcha.
And they're changing the pattern in which they're speaking. There's a word for it. I don't know exactly what the word for it is. I can't remember it. It's a big word. I probably wouldn't be able to pronounce it anyway. But it's basically like a study of these like small little nuances in your language where they're saying an adult would not be able to consciously change that. And at that particular time, it wouldn't have been something that was even remotely studied enough,
right?
Especially by the general population,
right?
To be mindful enough to change that. Like, this is
because your language is so ingrained in you at that point in time.
Right. And like they're using computers to analyze like the way the language goes, like the way you use like to before a word. Like, there's just a little nuance in your language that like your writing style, you can change your writing style, but the patterns in your words stay consistent. It changes dramatically before and after Stine. The letters all before are the same person. The letters after are not. Interestingly enough, the letters after are only going to the San Francisco Chronicle, and they're only going to one guy. I think his first name was Paul. His last name was Avery. They called him, in the police departments, Unsavory Avery. Why is he called Unsavory Avery? Because he was notorious for sort of milking stories a little bit, making things up a little bit, and making them a little bit bigger than they were. Ironically, the Zodiac is now writing him directly, and all these new letters And any other deaths that are tied after that are going directly to this guy Avery in the San Francisco Chronicle.
Is he the journalist that was featured in this most recent docuseries that was out, or is this somebody different?
No, he is not.
Okay.
And so that's what brings me to this journalist. And I got to get his name up because this is going to be important. And I'm not going to make any suspicions here. Zodiac Speaking Book.
Who really wasn't a journalist. Okay. He was actually a cartoonist.
He was a cartoonist.
He would do political drawings, yeah.
Yes. Is it Michael Kelleher or is it David Van Noyce?
I think it's David, but I could be wrong.
Violence expert. No, those are... Oh, man. Those are two different other people, though. That was a different book.
Is it Robert Graysmith? Is that who you're thinking of?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. Robert Graysmith. Yep. So he's like a cartoonist that is now... Cartoonist, yep. He's a cartoonist that is working at the paper when all these things are coming through.
He was working at the Chronicle, I think, right?
He was working at the Chronicle. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was the Chronicle. Or was he the one that was in Vallejo? Let's see real quick.
Yeah, it's positive. Yep.
So he's the one that writes this book about the Zodiac that subsequently is made into a movie, that subsequently made into multiple documentaries. Mm-hmm. What do we say about Ed and Elizabeth Warren?
We said it was plausible that a lot of their stories were fabricated because they wanted to make some money, baby.
So you've got a guy that has allegedly tied up all the loose ends in this story by just doing his own little espionage, his own little recon and stuff like that. And he's identified the Zodiac Killer, and he's pulling all this stuff together. And this becomes why I have the biggest issue with Arthur Lee Allen being the Zodiac, is because all of the evidence, every bit of it that ties Arthur Lee Allen to being the Zodiac is from one man's book. And by perpetuating that story from the book to the movie to the miniseries to the documentaries that have come since after, he's getting paid every single day. He was a cartoonist for a newspaper in the 60s. Yeah. He wasn't making a whole lot of money. And he's admit to that. He was getting by the skin of his teeth. And all of a sudden he's this published author that has solved the world's craziest crime. I'm not doubting that he's pulling strings and maybe he was privy to information based on what we talked about before. But I am doubting the fact that everything is using him as a source. He's not a journalist. He's a cartoonist. Not to say that we're journalists and, I'm saying anybody could do anything you want, but it just seemed awfully convenient. And again, all that stuff becomes circumstantial. Like you have to believe in all of it, which is fine. If there was enough evidence for any of it, Arthur Lee Allen would have been thrown in jail, and there was never enough evidence for that. For other crimes, yes. So that's what brings me kind of full circle there. I don't have the answers for it, and that's the beauty of our show and all these shows is I don't know. But to me, and I understand that it feels like you're jumping through a lot of hoops when you kind of try to connect all these things. But I think what you're actually trying to do is unweave them, right? It really comes down to a couple things. Faraday's killed a couple days after an altercation about drugs. Drugs are rampant there, gets killed. They can't solve the murder. Somebody else, the wife is cheating. 2 ex-husbands ago happens to be back in town, shoots her, calls the police right away, knows that somebody else is killed, just blames it on that. Boom, they have a serial killer story. It takes over. The media is ready to lie. The police are corrupt. They're probably protecting their boys, and they're probably feeding the story to the media. All that unnecessary information, all the Zodiac information, how do they get it? Well, they've got journalists we just found out that are in the police station. They could be looking at police reports and coming up with them by themselves. You can even go as far as saying, is Graysmith is the guy doing it? He's a cartoonist. Who's making all those block letters?
Yeah. Well, listen, Graysmith actually at one point in the most recent documentary says that he was given full and complete access to the Zodiac files at the Vallejo Police Department.
Yes, that is. It's not as it's happening immediately. It comes a little after, which is why
it was a little bit afterwards. Correct.
Out, right. And they brought him in multiple times, and they never had anything that can stick. Was the guy guilty? Did he feel guilty? People say that on and off all the time. I don't know how true that really is, but it always fascinated me that it took 7 months to get the first letter. Right. If the Zodiac Killer is who he is, right, and he is this guy that's like wants to claim all of this this pride and this joy. Why
Sure.
wait 7 months? And why tie 2 murders together right away? Why not come out right away and say it's you? And then it's like, it's bang. It's like, as soon as it comes out, immediately he bangs out the other one. And they ask, prove it. And he writes another letter and gives just like a little extra detail, which at that point, again, if you had access to a police station, you could find out that information on 1, 2, 3, or you can kind of guess some of it. But really, I think the difference was like the ammo that they use in each thing. It just seems really odd to me. And that's how I disconnect those two. So once you disconnect those two, you got to look at the last two. That's when we go to the Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. No, that's the early one. Sorry, that's when you go to the Lake Berryessa ones.
Lake Berryessa,
which just seems very out of character. Right, like you're walking out in the middle of daylight. Again, 7 p.m. California, it's sunny out. But you're walking out in pure, rich daylight in an open field, and you're talking to them in a hood. Right. And you're plastering your symbol on there. It seems something out of a cartoon, like so ridiculous. Right. And then, of course, the Paul Stine just doesn't add up. Excluding all these other pieces around here, all the other murders, like I think the Kathleen John's the one that got out of there. She was abducted. She labeled him as the Zodiac Killer. He drove her to a remote location. She was pregnant, so on and so forth. She showed sketches. Again, everyone's got those thick rim glasses. Like, you just don't really know. Right. Donna Lass was missing from her job as a nurse. And these are in the 70s now. These are years later. So,
right.
Are they tied to it, or are people just sort of grasping at straws to throw it? And then again, of course, then you've got the other big one was the Cherry Joe Bates in Riverside in '66, which kind of kicks this stuff off, which is way out. I mean, the Riverside one on a different map here, I think I have, is so far out. Like, these are some of the other ones that they tie into it. And this one, Tim, you'll laugh because this is how ridiculous these ones are. Hold on. I always got to make this screen bigger to do it. Okay, there we go. So, like, you've got all these killings, like, all the way down here at the bottom of the map. Like, this is hardcore down. This is basically San Diego, like Southern California here. Yeah. So to say one person's just driving up and down here, like, it doesn't make sense. Again, I know that there's some similarities in the cases, and there was some speculation that he was traveling up and then kind of found his way up here. I don't know that I really buy into that, but what do you think? After hearing all that, watching the documentary, are you still as sold on Arthur Lee Allen as you were before? Or have I introduced a little skepticism into your life?
I will say that there's certainly more skepticism. Bravo. Job well done. I think you definitely bring a very compelling case. Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, it's and I alluded to this at the beginning of this podcast. I mentioned this the other day when you and I were talking offline about this. I said, hey, this is really my first introduction is ALA. And if that's your first introduction and you watch that docuseries, there's no way it's not him. When you take a look at the other evidence, especially some of the other potential suspects and their motives for those killings, it becomes very, very interesting.
It's always about backstory. And it's always, we talk about it all the time, following the money. And when there's money involved in terms of selling papers, you have to start to question how much was embellished. I still do think that some of this was true. Like, I still think a letter came in from somewhere. And maybe that was it. Maybe it was Crabtree, right? Like, maybe it really was him initially trying to just get people off his scent. Because that's when he doesn't declare himself the Zodiac right away. It's the second letter that he calls himself the Zodiac. So that's when it starts to come together. But could that just be now somebody else? Could that be a newspaper guy saying, this is the Zodiac speaking? And all of a sudden, like, you're perpetuating the story because you're getting nothing more. I don't know.
Could be.
I have, since being going down this journey, I mean, I have been married to all of these. Like, Lawrence Kane, I thought at one point. Gaikowski, I thought at one point. Arthur Lee Allen, I thought for a long time, too. It's just as you see more and more and you start to piece it together a little bit more, and then the forensics come back and like exonerate a lot of these people. I don't know, man. It seems odd that after all this time and all of the close calls, you wouldn't have an answer, and that most of these people that are involved are dying or dead. So most again, if you take the Zodiac's letters as truth, braggadocious, very neurotic. Number one, why did you have stopped killing? There's one killer that actually has died, so that's why they think he stopped killing. Or number two, why wouldn't you admit it on your deathbed? Like, you're not going to go to your grave with that. What would be the point? You want that credit. Now
that's not the
knows.
typical MO of a serial killer, right?
It wouldn't be the typical MO of any serial killer. They always like
Sure.
they're intentional, right? So, yeah.
Let me ask you a question. If we found out tomorrow, okay, that they had definitive proof that it was Arthur Lee Allen, given what we just talked about, would you be surprised?
Surprised? No. I wouldn't be surprised because I think that there's an eagerness to pin it on somebody for closure. And I think that there's enough of a case based on his background and the fact that he's now dead so he can't defend himself. I think there's enough there to say it was him and nobody dispute it.
If there was something like DNA evidence that came through and you were like, hey man, this is kind of indisputable, right? Like, we're using science in 2024. We looked at the DNA. It matches. It was ALA.
So they did that in the documentary with the knife, and they looked at the blood and it was inconclusive. So what is that?
Well, they said that there was DNA, at least partial DNA, from three different individuals on that knife. Now I ask you though, right? And granted, maybe the answer is already in the podcast because we talked about it, right? Maybe he did someone. Why is there DNA evidence of three different individuals on that knife? That's weird.
You don't think that knife's ever been used in 50 years? You think that knife sat in a bag for 50 years?
Well, but my point is that
how do we know
that doesn't
people
exonerate.
That there's DNA on it?
What do you mean? How do we know the people that there's DNA on?
How do we know the DNA on there's all people? How do we know it's not an animal DNA?
That's a question for somebody with a much better brain than me.
That's what I'm saying. Is like what they were doing.
I'd venture to guess.
Match.
Right, but I would venture to guess that they could tell the difference between human DNA and animal DNA.
Right,
I'm guessing here. I don't know
if they addressed that specifically in the end of the documentary.
They didn't, and I thought it was a little vague. I thought it was very vague. I thought they kind of really just glossed over that part, and that did leave me questioning a little bit. Like, hey, like why didn't we go into this a little bit more?
If you know you have something there, why not delay it or let people know? I mean, what's the difference at that point? You got to get once you get that results out. If you could say it's him, your documentary skyrockets. So maybe they're planning on releasing a follow-up. I've seen other documentaries do that before, especially with the DNA stuff. I mean, I think it would depend on where he's tied to. I mean, maybe he could be the one at Lake Berryessa, right? So maybe he did that one. Maybe he got like obsessed with the idea and he did dress up like the Zodiac because he was nutty and thought it would be like funny to do.
Yeah.
But he didn't do the other ones, right? So I don't know. I think it would have to be, where does he fit into the puzzle? Because
one of the things, my bad, Gad, you continue and then I'm going to bring something up.
All I was going to say is like the other thing with like a lot of the serial killers in the past is like I feel like there's always like a reason or there's always some sort of a motivation in there. And, you know, the first three are couples, generally younger. I mean, Darlene and Ferrin was the youngest of the pack, but like they were younger couples. Why?
Yeah, usually in high school or just out of high school.
Right, like what would be the point? Like what would be the point of the couples, right? Like you're not like raping the women, you're just going up, killing them, and leaving right away. So to me, like the Darlene one specifically is described as like one of anger because the bullets were everywhere. It's like pop, 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 it was a spray. Whereas like the Faraday one was very precise. Like they shot Faraday, he was shot once in the back of the head. That's it. Yeah, it's very precision. So like even the MO almost or the crime scene in both of those are very different. And then they're very different throughout. Like each one is so different. And I'm not saying like, you know, I don't think that every serial murderer is supposed to be identical like it is in a TV show. I'm not saying that at all.
No,
I'm saying
there's
sometimes
evidence they do evolve and different things occur. I mean, if you look at Jack the Ripper and you look at his very first killing, and then you look at, you know, his very last killing, while they were similar, the last one was the most gruesome and very different.
That podcast is coming soon, ladies and gentlemen. If you've been Jack the Ripper, but there's speculation that those are different people as well. And those are different killings and they were copycats. But like if you look at like a Ted Bundy, for example, or you look at oh god, what's our other boy? Oh gosh, the clown guy. I can't think of his name.
Oh, why are you gonna fuck me up now? He was like one of my favorite ones because he scared the shit out of me because I always thought it was a killer clown, and then I found out it wasn't a goddamn clown. John Wayne Gacy.
John Wayne Gacy. But like John Wayne Gacy was going after young boys who he wanted to basically rape and kill. Ted Bundy was going after young girls who he was effective, which I don't know why he was raping them because he was a good-looking dude. He can get the girls, but he was basically going after young girls that he can rape and kill. Like there was a motive between all of it.
Right.
None of these have that.
Yeah, and most serial killers, there's some kind of
Mm-hmm.
arousal within the
Mm-hmm.
murder, and that's part of the reason, if not all
Right.
of the reason, why they're committing these
Right.
murders. There's something
Right.
involved there. Whereas if you look at the Zodiac murders, there's appears to be none of that,
It doesn't
which is very
seem to
different.
be, no. But that's
Right.
the only reason I look back and say, like, all right, well, the Cherry Joe Bates that happens in Riverside, that's
Yeah.
interesting because, again, I don't know that I tie it to this. Some people do. That makes a lot of sense that he's probably was going to try to rape her or something, or
Yeah.
assault her. I don't know which words we're going to have to get bleeped here. I'm probably going to have to bleep the crap out of these words, but she's probably going to try to do something very malicious to her, and maybe it just wasn't going the way you want her. Or maybe he just hit on her, and she shot him
Right.
down at some point, and he
Who
came
knows?
after her afterwards. It's hard for me to say. So to your question, really long-winded way to get there. I think it really depends on what they tie to him and what they say. If they just come out and say he did everything, I don't believe it. I think they're just
Yeah.
lumping it in there for to
Could be.
put a bow on it and close the case. If they say
So
that he's very pointed to this case and not this, I would believe that, and I wouldn't be that surprised. But it would be interesting to see that.
So you said something that kind of a light bulb went off in my brain. Maybe the Lake Berryessa murders were the result of ALA. So I want to go back to, and this is something that I asked you earlier, and you weren't sure. Maybe once I say it, you will know. But Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. All right, I'm just going to read a quick little transcript here. So this was on June 4th, 1963. 18-year-old Robert Dominguez and his fiancée, 17-year-old Linda Faye Edwards, were shot dead on a beach in, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Govoida,
Yeah,
whatever,
that's
state
on the
park.
map that I showed. Yeah, yeah.
Right. They skipped school at a high school, and they were out for senior ditch day. Okay. The reason why a light bulb went off when you said that it could have been ALA at Lake Berryessa, if you look at those two murders, they were very, very similar in some very specific aspects. Excuse me. You mentioned that they were tied up, okay? The couple at Lake Berryessa was tied up. They were tied up with pre-cut lengths of rope. It was actually, it wasn't even necessarily rope. It was more like a nylon clothesline is what they described it. At least that's what they talked about in the documentary, okay? If you go back to that other murder of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, both of those, right, those two individuals were also tied up with pre-cut cords of nylon rope looking just like a clothesline. Now, I'm going to bring the Seawater family back into it, right? Granted, we talked about a lot of the variables there as to whether or not it is or it isn't true, and how well you could really rely on the memory of a child, okay, many, many years ago. The three eldest members of the Seawater family, we already talked about them. Connie's the only name that I really remember because it really stuck out and she was a big part of that documentary, right?
Yeah.
State that they were there at that beach with ALA that day. They stopped by the side. They literally just pulled over on the side of the road. He said, "Kids, I gotta run down to the beach. I'll be right back. Don't move. Don't get out of the car." He was gone for roughly 45 minutes to an hour. When he comes back, he has something red on his hands, which Connie didn't put two and two together at that point in time because she's a young child, and later realizes, holy shit, that was blood. He just killed two people down there. Now, I shouldn't say very similar, right? Similar in terms of it was a couple. They were both tied up. They were tied up with pre-cut lengths of nylon rope. So those are your similarities there. What I do find odd, and maybe I'm going to contradict myself here, I don't really give a shit. What I do find very odd about that is, how the fuck did he know that there was a young couple sitting on that beach by themselves, and he was just going to be able to, in broad daylight, go down, tie them up, and kill them? I did find that very, very odd.
Well, that's what I find odd about a lot of them, even like the Lake Berryessa one, and what I thought the park ranger one becomes interesting because that's somebody that's patrolling that whole area the whole time. And as he's sifting from tree to tree, he's there, right? Otherwise, if a park ranger was there, he'd see them and say, what the fuck you doing? Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I've heard of that murder before. I've seen it in some other documentaries. Some people do tie it there. To me, again, like there's two different MOs though, right? Like when you loop that one in, Lake Berryessa and the Dominguez one are one. That is a completely separate MO. You're tying them up daylight beach. You're kind of coaxing them along a little bit and you're getting it done. You're there for an extended period of time versus the other ones, the other batch then, Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday, and then Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, Those are couples that are in a car, excluded, late at night. Looks like they're probably getting a little freaky there. Now, I get that they're still teens and stuff, but you're in, you're out. 1, 2, 3. It's just, it's two opposite ends of the spectrums where, like, I could see where you can make the ties. So to your point, where I think you were getting at is if you came back and said, all right, well, ALA did those two, but he didn't do these other two, I could see that too.
Sure.
I mean, I think there's a degree of him that could be guilty. And it could just be that maybe, again, he encountered that woman at some point on the beach. He encountered both of the women at some point on the beach. Maybe he was shunned by them. Maybe he wanted more out of them. Maybe it was a revenge type thing. Don't know. I just don't know that, from all intents and purposes, for him specifically, that he was competent enough to execute all of these things so finely and to write those. And I think the makeup of each of the murders is very different. Like, that one, the Cecilia one, and the Lake Berryessa one is very sloppy compared to the other two, which are like, I mean, you walk up, you're shooting, you're in and out, and like there's nothing to do.
Yeah, the other ones are almost like a mob style hit, right? They're it's almost like a drive by or
that's exactly what it is,
right? It's like
which
very
adds into the idea like a motorcycle gang comes in the Faraday one because it's like
exactly.
You come in, and, pop, and you're out of there.
Right.
1, 2, 3.
And also, so let's talk about this real quick, right? If you take a look at most serial killers, I can't definitively prove this. This is just something that kind of popped in my brain. How do they usually kill most of their victims? Would you say it is with a gun, or is it by other means? Whether it be stabbing them, strangling them, whatever it may be.
Right.
It's generally by other means.
The fight.
Right? It's usually exactly. It's usually much. It's. Look, I've never killed anybody. I hope I never kill anybody. Throughout, studying and watching lots of documentaries, right? You kind of learn a little about what's inside of a killer's mind, and that intimate moment where you're taking somebody else's life. They seem to be, it's more attractive from their perspective to do it with something that's closer, with their own hands, with wire around their neck, with a knife, right? It's just a little bit more. A gun is very removed. It's a machine. It just seems to be very different. And I do find that to be very odd.
It's very rare that I think you have a gun-related murder that's random. Usually it's tied to something, like a robbery, domestic dispute, violence. Like, it's rare you're just going to be walking down the street or sitting on the beach, somebody's just going to walk up out of the blue, just pop you in the face. It doesn't happen that way. For precisely the reason you're talking about is, like, when you do have that mindset, when you're psychologically damaged like that, you're looking for the thrill. That's not thrilling, I imagine. Like, you're looking for the thrill of it. And so that's why I think historically, when you do see that, it's more calculated and it's planned. And it's just, I guess you can say the Berryessa one could have been a little bit planned because he stalked them for a while. That's the other thing.
He stalked them. They were, he did, there was a stabbing involved. So that one was,
and it's like, that's like, it's, I mean, even if you jab them fast, like, it's still a slow, like, deterioration.
It's different.
You can kind of bask in it.
He tied them up, right? Exactly.
And he talked to them for 15 minutes.
And he talked to them, right? So it was a much more personal experience.
It's very odd, yes. So, I don't know, man. I mean, we're clearly not going to be the ones to solve it today, but I want to pass some doubt in there. I don't think so. I think with this documentary that just came out, and then there was one previous, I want to say that was like the search for the Zodiac. I think I threw it up on Plex at some point. That was a really good one. That was one of my favorite ones. They did a lot of analysis of the ciphers. There was another cipher that was cracked not long ago. I think there's just too much misinformation out there, and I hate to use that phrase. But the hunt for the Zodiac Killer, that was the other one, which is ironic because that actually inspired this one that was just on Netflix. Because they saw this one, yes. And that's when they wanted to share their story, which, again, always makes me a little skittish. But
right.
I think there's just
we want to make money on this, too.
Hello. I think there's just so much, like, noise out there that it's hard to sift through it. And I think we're so far removed at this point where all your tangible evidence is kind of gone. And so short of a confession, I don't think you're ever going to get it. I do think you'll get a commonly accepted answer, and I suspect that's going to end up being somebody like Arthur Lee Allen, just because he's the most convenient. But I don't know that any of the victims' families, whomever's left of them, will buy that and will sleep at night with that posture over her head. Again, solely because he had the opportunity twice to admit to it in his dying days and didn't. Especially, you mentioned it earlier with that letter in his hand. That is like when they said about the letter, and it's not the first time I've heard about that. I did forget about it when I heard about it this time. When they said about the letter, I'm like, oh my God, this is the admittance. Tim's gonna get me on this one. He knew this the whole time as I'm watching this documentary. But no, and this is I didn't do it, and that to me is so telling. Your death note right there. I didn't do it. Doesn't add up. Doesn't add up to me. So I'm going with a no. It'll forever be a mystery.
Yeah. Who knows?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have your theories, we would love to hear them in the comments below. Like, subscribe. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on X, YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble. All those favorite links are down below. Or you can head on over to conspiracyrealist.com. Remember to click that subscribe button. It does help us out quite a bit, guys. It's our journey to... we'll take 500. Right now we're at 469 followers at the time of this recording. Journey to 500, and then journey to 1,000. That would be really cool. If you've got a friend that likes this kind of stuff, send them our way. Until next time, stay safe out there, Zodiacs.